Starting this year now in Likutei Moharan, this year is going to be Ilay Nishmas Isa Bat R Dovid. Yeah, was a very special lady, the mother of course, our Rebbe Nissim, who used to host, who's hosts this year, just currently on Zoom, but for now, but he's the host. So she should have a Aliyas Neshama. The Neshama should go up.
Amen.
A Melitz Yosher for all of us.
Amen.
And her schis should stand for all of us. So we're holding here in the middle of Torah Vav and Likutei Moharan. And basically, what we said so far was Rebbe Nachman emphasized the inyan how a person has to humble himself and not look for his own kavod, but just look for the kavod of Hashem. And he said that can only come through tshuva, in the sense that if a person does tshuva, then he can access that level on which he doesn't look at his own self and his own kavod, because tshuva brings a person to humility and to seeing that we're fallible, we make mistakes. The most important part of tshuva, according to the Rambam, is the idea that it won't happen again, in the sense that we have to look at anything that we did in the past, even things that we did that are wrong. We have to look at those as learning experiences, and instead of beating ourselves up about it, look at that as a way in which to grow and see what mistakes we made in the past and how we can do things differently the next time around. So the whole idea of tshuva is this idea of that we're not perfect, and our whole intelligence that we think we have and the way we think we know how to do things, it humbles us and causes us to realize that we don't always know how to do things, and we have to look at things sometimes in a new way and look for new approaches how to deal with things. So that humbles the person. And he said that the sign of that a person is humble to that level would be that he gets to the level where if someone insults him, it doesn't affect him, and he doesn't feel like he needs to respond, because that is the ultimate test of humility. You know, if someone's own kavod is being attacked and the person doesn't answer, that is the sign that he's gotten to that level. So that's basically what he talked about, and then he went to this inyan where he said that in order to be able to do tshuva properly, the person has to know halacha. And to know halacha, he said that there's two aspects of halacha. One aspect of halacha, it says, is Ritzoi, and the other is Shoiv, which comes from the Chayes HaKodesh on the Merkava, where you have that it says they were Ritzoi v'Shoiv, they're running and returning, in the sense that even to grasp the glory of Hashem, even for the Malachim, is something that can't be done on a constant basis. And Rebbe Nachman himself didn't really explain to us what it means in Halacha, Ritzoi v'Shoiv. We're going to see soon that at the end of the Torah, Reb Nussin is going to give his parish, or Reb Nachman meant. He's going to go into what this really means. And so we're going to see that. We talked about a little bit last week, that the idea is basically Ritzoi is going forward, is the idea of taking upon yourself new avodas and new ways of serving Hashem and increasing your avodas Hashem. And the person has to do that intelligently, in the sense the person has to know what's halachically obligated and what's extra. And if he wants to do extra, kol kavod, but it has to be in a way that he's able to do the extra without overwhelming himself. The person has to do it in a gentle way. And then the shoiv is to make sure you don't fall back in your avodas Hashem. So because wherever you're holding is your current level, and you're expected to hold yourself by that standard, so you shouldn't fall back from that, right? So that's something that we're going to see more of. Nussin is going to elaborate on that very soon. And then he went into this slightly complicated piece where he basically compared this to the Aleph, where the Aleph is like there's a Yid above the Aleph, and then there's the Aleph, and then there's a Vov, which is the middle of the Aleph, and there's another Yid below the Aleph. So he said that those basically represent the Mashpia and the Makabel, being the top Yid and the bottom Yid, being the Mashpia and the Makabel. He called the Moshe and the Yerushiah, or however you want to call it. It doesn't really make a difference. It's Mashpia and Makabel in any erech. And then the Vov in the middle is like the inyan of the Rakia, which separates the two, because there always is some sort of a separation between the Mashpia and the Makabel. So Reb Nussin is going to elaborate on that once we're finished the Torah. But first, let's see the end of Reb Nachman's words here, where he explains this in the words of Rabba Bar Bar Chona. So this is Torah Vav in the Likutei Moharan and its subsection Vav of that Torah, where he Kedarke B'Kodesh is going to translate that back into the Agadah of Rabba Bar Chona. He says, just some background noise. I'm just muting people. Don't get offended if you're getting muted. It's just like. Okay. Just because there was some background noise. You can unmute it whenever you want to say anything. Okay, so basically, so here we go. So he says, "V'zei perish Omer Rabba Bar Chona." This is the perish of the words Rabba Bar Chona said. Where he said, "Zimna Chada." One time, Havas linen b'madbar. We were going in the midbar, and v'chazinen Hana Ivzen. We saw these geese, right? The shemitin gadfaihi mishmenaihi. That their feathers were falling off because of their fat. These were very fat geese, so fat that their feathers are falling off. This is the push-up shot in the words that Rav Chona saw over here. And he says, "V'ku nagd nachle de mishche metesai," and there were flowing rivers of fat from below these sheep, below these geese. And I said to these geese, Rabbi Bar Chona says, he said to the geese, "Isli menaichi chalika alma de usai." Do I have a portion of you in the next world? So it looks like he understood that somehow these geese are not ordinary geese that we can enjoy here in this world. These geese represent the Hanua that we're going to have in the next world. So he asked them, am I going to have a portion of you in the next world? So he says, Chada, one of them, Dalyali Atma, one of them showed me his foot. So one of them said, yeah, that basically you're going to get to eat this juicy, delicious foot in the next world. The other one raised a wing and said, you're going to have this wing in the next world. And the Gemara says, or Rabbi Bar Chona says, Ki asui lekame de Rebbe Luzer. When I went to Rebbe Luzer, overlay, he said to me, Asidni su litlan alayhem esadin. The Yidden are going to have to be punished on account of these sheep in the future. And the way this is explained, like if you look on the side, he has here the Perish Rashbam. If you have the same Likutei Moharan that I do, where the Rashbam just explains, we don't have to go through the whole thing, just that last piece. What's the thing that the Yidden are going to have to be punished for this? So the Rashbam explained, Litin Laim Asadin, Shebechatus, because of our Chatu and because of our virus, Misakev Mashiach's coming was delayed. V'yesh lahem tsar balachayim loisen avzin machmas shimnan. And these geese, as long as they're alive, they suffer because of being so fat. I guess it's not good for animals to be that fat. And as long as we're delaying Mashiach, we're causing the suffering of these geese to continue. And so because of that, when Mashiach comes, we're going to have to sort of be punished for that tzar balachayim that we gave those geese. So that's push-up shot in the Agadah. Now we're going to see how Rebbe Nachman learns it. So Rebbe Nachman explains, Shehulach lachka b'midas hatoiva shalanova. That Rebbe Nachman, what's it called? The Rabbi Bar Chona is now going to, what he's doing here is explaining to us the inyan of anova, of humility. She'udam masam atzmai kamidbar ludash. The person has to make himself like a desert, which is something that's trampled upon. It's dust that's trampled upon. Shakal dushnula, that everyone, he should, in a sense, allow everyone to step on him, in a sense. This requires a little bit of a sort of like a, what do you call it? Like a disclaimer, a little bit. Because you have to, everything has to be done in an intelligent way, right? And this also. Obviously, the idea isn't that a person should allow himself to be totally trampled upon. Obviously, the Gemara goes into in detail on these things. You have like in Bava Metzia, Daf Lamed Amud Beis, for example. You have the story there where the Gemara discusses that sometimes certain things, certain mitzvahs shouldn't be done by Rabbunim, for example, because it's beneath their kavod. Like he has this story that I think it was Rabbi Shmuel. It was Rabbi Shmuel, I think, over there in the Gemara in Bava Metzia, where there was this person that was carrying these heavy sticks, and he put the sticks down. He told Rabbi Shmuel, pick out these sticks for me. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that if someone has a if someone has a something he's carrying that's heavy and it falls down, they have to help him put it back. And Rabbi Shmuel, he said he saw that it was beneath his covet to do that. So Rabbi Shmuel instead just paid him the worth of the sticks. Go get yourself a new sticks and don't embarrass me in public, right? So, and obviously Rabbi Shmuel wasn't about gava, right? Only the Inyan is that for example a Talmud Chacham, for example, has to be respectable, and it doesn't look good when a Talmud Chacham is being forced to schlep heavy things in the marketplace, and it's part of the Kavod Torah. Also, there's the Inyan of personal boundaries, which are very, very important for a person's own psychological well-being. Right? If a person doesn't have those proper boundaries, and he makes himself always available to people all the time to do whatever those people want them to do, and then people take advantage of that, and then he feels he's being taken advantage of. At the same time, he doesn't know how to say no. Right? So we're not talking here about something that's going to affect a person's psychological and emotional well-being. A person has to have boundaries and has to set those boundaries and has to be sensitive with himself. I know how much you can deal with, and how much not to. But the idea here is that in terms of a person's gava and in terms of a person's looking at himself as superior, that has to be annulled. And the way to annul that is to get to the level where it doesn't bother you when someone can say something that's very nasty, or someone can trample all over you in a sense. But of course, this is all intended to be taken in a healthy way, and the person should do it in a way that a person has to set certain boundaries. But anyway, so he says, but that's what he's saying, that the reason why the Rabbi Baruch Hu is talking about being in a midbar, being in a desert, is because he's talking about this idea of being like a desert, being hefker and not being disturbed by the fact that someone steps on you, just like the desert isn't disturbed when someone steps on it. So anyway, it says V'ru Chachomim, and he saw the Chachomim, right? So these geese that he saw is actually a mushal for Chachomim. He says V'zei b'chinas avzayrat, and they're called geese. Chazal say in the Gemara and Bruchas, Haraya avaz b'chulam yitzapeh l'chachma. Someone who sees a goose in his dream, he can expect to gain wisdom, in the sense that geese are a symbol of wisdom. So in this context here, the geese will be the chachomim. And he says the shemitim got fired, that their feathers were coming off because of the fat. So he says Perish Rashi noitzes. Rashi explains that the word gadfai, because the Aramaic word gadfai could mean their feathers, but it could also mean their wings, right? So a person could potentially learn this Gemara and say that their wings were falling off because of the fat, and that's a little bit out of context. So Rashi explains it means noitzes, it means feathers. So what does this idea of these feathers mean? So the Rebbe Nachman explains, this is idea of having people disagree with you and having people embarrass you, is this idea of feathers. Why? When Shakusik says in the Pusik in Devorim, Ki Nutzi Anushim, that's talking over there, I believe, about the Das Koirach, and it says that the people stood up. Yinutzi is also expression of standing up, like Nitzuvim. Possibly the idea of feathers, actually the actual shorish is consistent, because it could be that the idea is because the feathers like sort of like stand up out of the flesh of the animal. But the idea is that, so this word feathers can also mean standing up, and standing up for machloikas, like over there we see in the Devorim over there, that's used to refer to Das Koirach, who stood up to challenge, right? To challenge Moshe Rabbeinu. So the idea is that if you have people that stand up to challenge you and to disrespect your authority, right? So sometimes that's something that a person has to work on himself, not to feel that way. That's the idea that the feathers are falling off, is the idea that the person needs to get to that level. The chachomim need to get to that level, because the chachomim are the geese, where that falls off, where the people's attacks on them and the people's insults to them just fall off and don't affect them. Just Heini, Shein Mashgichin al Machloikas of Zionis, Shemavaznois. And the idea is that the Chachum have to get to this level where they don't care. They're not concerned about the Machloikas that people make with them, and the Bezionis Shemaviznois and the way that they embarrass them. Right? And of course, Rebbe Nachman is talking from experience, because he had a lot of that. There's a lot of people who were against Rebbe Nachman, and he had a lot of these bizyonis and the suffering, right? And you see this in Likutei Moharan, and he dealt with it, right? So he's giving us advice for this, for something that he knew very much about. And they hear their embarrassment, and they don't answer. And he says, Ein Sham, or maybe Al Shem, Hashtika. I guess Al Shem Hashtika, the reason why they're called Chachomim is because they're able to be silent when they're insulted. Key, because it says in Pirkei Avos, Siag l'Chachma Shtika, that silence is a siag, is a gate, is like a guard for Chachma. So we see that this idea of being able to be quiet and not answer is actually something that makes a person, that increases a person's Chachma. When a person is able to be more objective and look at things in a more objective way, and not let his own ego get in the way. So he says, "Kashtika hi bechinas keser." Because shtika, silence is bechinas keser. Kushan is because keser is bechinas ayin, or nothingness, because it's something so high that's beyond our comprehension. But the idea is going to be that, so that's represented by quiet, because quiet or silence is the very idea of being totally above and beyond and transcendental. So keser is associated with silence. He says on the side here, we can look at, there's a star here that goes to the side. There's a note where he says, that through silence, that way a person can come to tshiva. Shebechinas keser, which is keser canal, like he discussed above. Zebechinas siag lechochma shtika. That's the whole idea that says a siag, a gate, like a fence, a protection for chochma, is silence. He says siag daika. Specifically, the word siag was used. Say bechinas keser, because that's bechinas keser. She bechinas siag v'geder sov, because the keser is like a fence, right? Which sort of divides that which is totally beyond us and totally rachni from that which is below, which is the olam atzilus and all the olamas which are lefi erech, more physical, so to speak. Shemesav v'machter v'mater as because the case is like is the Zohar calls the case of the Golgalt, like the skull, and Chachma is the brain. So it's something that surrounds and protects the Chachma. He says v'zei ha-keser shebechinas siag. In this case, which is like this gate or this fence, naser me hashtika chanal. That comes from this silence. The person is silent and doesn't answer. V'zei siag l'chachma shtika chanal. And that's what it means, siag l'chachma shtika. Okay, so back to the main text. Just give me a second. So to learn, wer hat Levi Yitzchak? Kannst du nehmen to the back? Just will give the shir jetzt. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so back to the main text. So he says, "V'zei the shemitin, that the feathers were falling off." Right? The K'mar Shekuz, like it says in the pasuk, "Shumit kol bal masha yudoi." That it's talking about Shemitah, and it's saying that every creditor, everyone that that has people that owe him money, he should be mishama, that he should cancel that, should remit that on the Shemitah year. So the idea is that, so he says, Hainu shaloi yidbel boino, that so the idea is that the idea of the creditor is that when the Shemitah comes, he's not going to try to collect that loan or get that loan repaid. Right, so too, the idea is that a person has to get to this level of chachma and this level of self-control and self-annulment and bittul, where he doesn't have to collect repayment for the way that he was embarrassed and the way that he was punished. V'zei perish mishmenayin. That's what it means. He says where it said that the feathers were dropping because of the fat. Right. He says this is an illusion. This is from the illusion of Shemamto Avisu, where you have this Indian that is talking with the Yid that they grew fat. And the sense over there is that it's an expression of complacency, that they got too complacent. And then they started sinning against Hashem. So the idea is that these Chachomim always look at themselves, like he talked about, that a person always has to do tshiva. And even a person's doing the roots in Hashem, he still has to do tshiva, because even if he didn't do an Avaida, because he has to do tshiva on the fact that according to the level he's on now, the level he was on 5 minutes ago isn't so high anymore, because he's grown since then. Right? So the idea is that that person always has to look at himself in a sense critically. Obviously, we're not talking about looking at yourself critically in the sense of, I'm such a terrible person and Hashem doesn't love me, chas v'shulam, where some people tend to fall into that sort of a space. It means just the awareness that we're always growing with something that might have been appropriate for us to do 5 minutes ago, even 5 minutes ago, especially a year ago, right? Wouldn't be appropriate for us to do now in the place that we are on now. So the idea is that these chachum are always looking at themselves as if maybe I'm too complacent, maybe I'm getting too fat and too settled in, and maybe I'm not doing as much as I could be doing. So he explains, Koloimer, Machmas, she oichzen atzman bebechinas, shemanto visu. Right, so the idea is that because they hold on to this level of am I getting too complacent, and that's that fat of the geese, which represents these chachumim coming to that realization and doing tshiva, and therefore not being affected by when other people speak negatively about them. It says Haine b'shvil zeh shoymen cherpusan v'ayne meshiven, so they hear people insulting them and they don't answer. Kizei oisim b'shvil tshiva al v'noisam, they do this as part of their tshiva process and part of their progress and part of their spiritual growth. Which goes like it says in the pusik v'yishman yeshirin, because it says over there that yeshirin, which is the klal yisrael, we're getting a little too fat, a little too complacent, and that caused problems. Because bechinas hashemen, bechinas hashman life. The Oznav Penyire, so he's quoting like literally like one word at a time from a pusik. So I'm not sure exactly what the context is there, but he says Shachiva Tzurich Liyos V'Shloisha Tnum Ali. Oh, right, he mentioned this before. The chiva has to be in 3 different ways. Part of it has to be a chiva on the lev, which is the thoughts and the feelings, and part of it is on the aznayim, on the ears, and part of it is on the eyes, because all of these things are things that can get us in trouble. So we have to do tshiva on all those levels. It's actually someone was asking me today, literally, about this Indian. Someone called me up today and wanted to know about Shmiras Einayim, and he was saying that he was reading a lot of Sfurim, talking a lot of very important things about Shmiras Einayim, but he was feeling that he sort of overdid it because like he had like this person's about Shiva, and then he had like a lady that he knew from before who contacted him and said she was in the hospital, and then he said he didn't call her back because he thought it wouldn't be tznius, and then he felt very bad about it afterwards. So I said this is a perfect example of how there's so many different levels in this, and not always is a person on the same level, and not always does a person need to be on the same level. So the sense is that we should always be growing, but don't overdo things, right? Don't go out of bounds. But anyway. Be sensitive with yourself. That's the most important thing. Be gentle with yourself. And make sure that you can be makabel something before you take it on. Anyway, so he says, and that's what he says. He says, "V'nagde nachle the mishcha mit chesaihi," and says that there was literally rivers of schmaltz flowing from rivers of fat flowing from below these geese. It says, "Heine al dei hashtika," through this silence that they're able to be silent. Zoichen the kvoile leki, they're able to zoichen to the true covet, which is covet Hashem, which is not their own covet. She bechina Hashem, which is like this bechina of oil. Kamashikuz, like it says in the pusik, "Ahavta tzedek." V'mesan reisha, someone who loves righteousness and hates evil. Alkain mishchachov. That's why I anointed you. Oh, sorry, it's ahavtu tzedek. Since you loved righteousness and since you hated evil, alkain mishchachov. Because of that, I anointed you. So you see that oil is this anointing from Hashem that comes from a person's working on themselves, working on their humility. He said that's also what it means. It says in the pusik, Melech HaKuvod, Hashem is the Melech HaKuvod, because the sense is that the Hashem's kuvod is the only real kuvod that's of any real significance. And he says, "V'amin alehi." So then I said to these geese, "Isli menaychi chilka almadusai." Do I have a portion of you in the next world? It says, "Daldili atma." One of them picked up its foot and showed him that he's going to get the foot. So he says, this inyan of the foot is the inyan of the fact that the world is Hashem's footstool, which is like the lower yid of the aleph, which is like the bottom aspect, which is the mekabel. Then Chadad the Dalidei Kunaf, and one of them showed me its wing. Zebechinas Kisei, that's like Hashem's Kisei HaKoved, Kmashikusiv, like it says in Ishaya, V'lo Yikanaif Oid Merechu, that your master will no longer hide himself. Ishaya is talking about Losid Luvai, that Hashem will no longer be concealed. So you see that this idea of Kanaif, or Kanaf, which is like a wing, is the idea of like hiding or concealing, because it's like, imagine like Kivyuchel, obviously Hashem doesn't have any physical attributes, but imagine like he had like a wing and you cover himself with the wing so you can't see him. Right? So that expression of the kanaf, that's the expression of Hashem's glory, the kisei kovod. Vasai bechinas nikida elyonin, that's the top nikida, the top yid of the aleph. Hainishe shari Rabba Barchuna, they showed Rabba Barchuna shegam he zochel alei bechinas. He'll be zochel to these two levels, and the Nachman talked about previously. There's a level of ascent. You start with being a makabel. You start at the bottom, you sort of work your way up, and then eventually you become the person sitting on the kisei hakuvud. It's like this famous thing that the Rebbe Lafia says this. When Yecheskel saw the kisei hakuvud and he saw this figure sitting on the throne, well, whose face did it have? And he says it was Yecheskel's own face that it had, because he saw himself up there. Because Hashem doesn't have a form, so the physical form kivyuchol that that we know about and of the spheres is going to be different for each person. Each person is his own chaylik of Elikah, right? That the chaylik al each person is a distinct chaylik of that, and the person's own spirituality will be his own unique spirituality. And eventually, when he sees the Kisei Kovod, he'll see himself sitting on the Kisei Kovod, rather his higher self, where Hashem manifests itself through his Tzelem Elikim, that's that person's Tzelem Elikim. Right? Because each of us has literally, also like I was telling somebody today who called me up about a problem, that there's not one Yiddishkeit. There's as many Yiddishkeites as there's people, right? Because obviously certain things like halachas are set and we have to do things a certain way. But then in Hashkufas, Chazal gave a very, very broad, there's much to choose from us in terms of Hashkufa. There's many different Mahalchim, the Rishonim and the Achroinim and the Chassidim, by the Litvisher, by the Sfardim, right? So each person's spirituality is their own journey, which doesn't compare to anybody else's journey anywhere else in the entire history of mankind, right? So the idea is that eventually you see yourself on that throne. You rise to that level where you're the one sitting on the throne, which is not you, of course, not the physical you, not the ego, but it's that original blueprint that you manifest when you come down here to this world. So anyway, that's what he says. So then he says, Omer Rab Eluzar. Yeah. So then it says that when he went to Rebbe Eluzar, he told Rebbe Eluzar about this incident. So Rebbe Eluzar said, Asidan Yisrua Lita and Alayim Esadin. Push-up shot means, like we saw in the Rashbam, right, that the Yidden will have to be punished for that they allowed those sheep those geese to suffer so much balachayim. But here he says, the Rav says in the Chassidish way that means a little bit differently. He says like this. He says, Ki Yisruel nikruim udam. The Yisruel are called udam. We are the image of udam, in the sense that udam is a tzelem elikim, and a tzelem elikim has a certain covet to it. And chas v'shulam, I mean, obviously we know that every udam has a tzelem elikim, and even a goy has a tzelem elikim. But they're not expressing that to its full extent. Neither are we, or some of us. We're trying to, right? But the goal is that if we follow our mahalach and our derech and the way that that the mahalach of the tzaddikim, then we elevate or mekadesh that udam and we reveal what udam really means, right? So Yisrael are called udam. And Hashem and the Yidden are all one. Yisruel shehem bechinas udam, and Yisruel, which are that udam, yashvi ala kiseh, like we said, the Yidden, kavyuchol, the Yid is that Tzelem Elikim that's sitting on the throne. Yecheskel's merkova. When shekusev ala kiseh dmis kamaray udam, that's what it says by Yecheskel, that on the throne was sitting the image of a man, and that man is the Yid, because the Yid is mamish able to, if he works on himself, to actually mamish manifest that Kedishus Elikim, and be literally the one on the image on the throne. Yisrael Yitn Din the Chol Boy Olam, then there'll be that beginning. The Yidden are going to give judgment upon the entire world. Hanehem Yishpiti Be'atzman Kol Adin. The Yidden will judge all of the Dinin, in the sense that So when Mashiach comes, before things transition into a whole new reality which you can't even comprehend, but there will be that level that everyone's going to come to the Yidden and ask them, well, what do we do now? What's the right thing to do in this situation? And the Yidden will give everyone the din that's relevant to them. Right, so that's going to be this level that he's referring to here. That Yisrael are going to give the din. Literally, we're going to give the din. We're going to give the psak and on how everyone is to conduct themselves, what they're to do. We will become the spiritual compass of humanity. Then he says in Zion, the next piece, v'zei perish, and that's the perish. Yad bar amim tachtaini, le'imim tachas reglaini. It says in Tehillim, right? We'll have the nations under us, and the nations under our feet. So it says, Zeh bechinas chirik. That's that chirik, which the chirik is the vowel point that's at the bottom of the ois. Right? So that represents that lower yid of the aleph. That represents the level of the makabel. And he says in the kiddush tachtoina shel aleph, that's the lower yid of the aleph. She bechinas, that's the bechina of v'tachas raglav, below the feet. Bechinas v'uretz hadoim raglai. That the earth is my footstool, says Hashem. And then the Pusah continues in Tehillim, Yav Chaluni es nachlasaini, we will pick our inheritance. Right? Zeh bechinas Moshe, that's the idea of Moshe, bechinas nekeda el yoina, shall aleph, that's the yid on top of the aleph, bechinas imimal, the rakia, dmis kisa, and that's the idea of that above the rakia, I saw an image of a throne, Yechezkel says, bekisoi, keshemish, and the throne is like the sun, play Moshe, kepnai achama, the face of Moshe is like the face of the sun. Mamar Chazal, like Chazal say, Reb Shimon Omer, Nachlo zi, Nachlo zi Shiloi. What does Nachlo mean? Nachlo means Shiloi. And Shiloi, push we have in the Pusik, in the Nevi'as that until Shiloi comes, which a lot of times learn that means Mashiach, then we have the Inyan, like he brings here, Shiloi do Moshe, that Shiloi is Moshe, brings us from the Zohar. So anyway, so just to sum up what we saw here in this little shtickle here, so he's saying that there's going to be different levels of ascent that we're going to experience when Mashiach comes. First, there's going to be the level where it's just going to be basically that the goyim are subject to us, Yad B'Amim Tachtani Le'imim Tachas Reglaini, which is the idea that, like you said before, that we're going to be the spiritual compass for them and tell them what they're supposed to do in their avodah. But in that sense, we're still like the bottom part of the aleph, right? But then we can rise up and transcend and rise to the level where we'll actually be the manifestation of Elokis in this world, which is going to be like the top yid on the top of the aleph, which that represents the sun, which is the mashpia. That's represented by Moshe Rabbeinu, which Moshe Rabbeinu was the mashpia for the whole Klal Yisrael. And so we're going to get to that level, Bez Hashem. And he says, the Pusah continues, as Go'on Yaakov, the greatness of Yaakov, he says, Zeh bechinas vov shebetoich aleph. That's like the vov in the middle of the aleph, right? It's bechinas oil, which is like an oil, because that vov in the middle of the aleph represents the rakia, represents like the firmament of the heaven, which is in a sense like an oil, like a tent spread above the world, right? So he says that's that. Bechinas oil, and that's oil. Shemoy Shemai Elishia, because that vov between the two yids of the aleph is like the connection between them, which the top yid is the Moshe, the Mashpia, and that vov is like the, it's almost like a separation, but in a sense it's like a filter to allow that light to come down to the lower yid of the aleph, which is Yeshia, which is the Mekabel. So these are these three levels. And Shemoy Shemai Yeshia, like it says, V'Yakov ish tam Yoshev Aholim. So the Yaakov was a ish tam, a simple person, Yoshev Aholim, sitting in tents. All right, so that represents the Inyan. The Yaakov is this Inyan of that oil or that parsa, which is the vuv, separating the top eater of the aleph from the bottom eater of the aleph. So he says, that's the bechina that it says, Shloisha dvorim shenitzavi Yisrael, the Yidden were commanded three things. And it says, in other words, the Gemara over there is talking about when the Yidden commentary to Yisrael, they had three special mitzvahs to do. And one of those was Sheichili Zara Shel Amulek, to destroy the children of Amulek, is one. And that would correspond to the first part of the Pusik in Tehillim, that nations should be subject to us, which is part of that is going to be to eliminate that Amulek. And the reason for that is because Amulek literally represents that evil impulse in the nations. In a sense like we have in chassidus, where it talks about the Amalek within every one of us. And that Amalek is that gaiva, right? The Amalek is that willingness to be above everyone and not to allow anyone to insult us or do anything negative to us. That comes from being too involved in the illusion of being a separate entity, because we're really just part of Hashem's plan. We're all just aspects of this whole system that Hashem created, right? And when we lose sight of that and we think of ourselves as being as very self-important, that's the problem. And that's the Amulek. Righteous Goyim Amulek. Amulek is like that aspect of the Goyim which gives them that gaiva and that willingness to be in control of everything. But really, they have to be able to be a bichin of makabel. They have to become like a malchus to be able to receive from us what we have to teach them, right? So in order for that to happen, the Amalek has to be wiped out. That idea of that self-importance, which will not allow them to receive from us, has to be wiped out, and that's the side of the wiping out of Amalek. So he says. So that's the first part. So the first mitzvah is to wipe out the Zara Shalom Amalek. Then the second mitzvah is Limnois Lohem Melech, to make a king for us. All the mitzvahs that was dependent on going into Eretz Yisrael. And that is going to be Zay Bechinas Goin Yaakov, and that's what it means in the Pusik Goin Yaakov, the greatness of Yaakov, which is the Bechin of Durach Koichav Mi Yaakov, which it says, that this is one of the Nevi'as from Bilam, where it says that what's it called, that star will come out of Yaakov.
Daddy, before you continue talking,
Let me just mute everyone. No offense. It's just like, so there's no background noise. If you want to say something, you can unmute. Right. So that's basically the idea. So the idea is that Durach Koichav Mi Yaakov refers to Mashiach, which is a king, or some say it refers to David Melech himself. But Bilam saw this Nevi of a star coming from Yaakov. That's the idea of a king. So he says, Bechinas Melech, that's a king. So that's the Go'oin Yaakov, which is Durach Koichav Mi Yaakov, which is that mitzvah of establishing a king. Viv Nois Lahem Baisa Bechira, and to build up the Baisa Mikdash, Zay Bechinas Moshe, that's Bechin of Moshe, Bechinas Das, which is Das. Moshe is the Das. So a lot of times the Zohar says this, because the Das is basically the bridge between the Moichen and the Midas, because you have the spheres of Keser and Chochma and Bina, which is Moichen, which is total intellect, total mind. Then we have the lower spheres, which represent something more tangible, and the Das is the segue between them. So that's going to be like Moshe Rabbeinu, which Moshe Rabbeinu was the bridge, so to speak, between Elikis and between the Klal Yisrael. So he says that so that idea of building the Beis Hamikdash, that's Bechinas Moshe, Bechinas Das. Chazal say, Misha Eshloi Daya, someone that has Daya, someone that has intellect, Kili Niv the Beis Hamikdash Beyumav. It's like the Beis Hamikdash is built in his own time. And the side of this is, of course, what we've talked about many times, is that Gulas is really an illusion. And it's Gulas Hadas, right? And the Gulas is a perspective thing. And the person could be assuming the person on the level, which is obviously much easier said than done, the person could have the most difficult times, physically speaking, and yet be very connected in a spiritual sense and feel totally happy and total joy. Because the whole gulas is just a mindset. And so someone who has das, it's as if he's living with a Beis Hamikdash, the Chazal tell us. Right? So he says, that's the bechin of Yavcher Luni es Nachlasaini, which the Pusik in Tehillim over there continues, we will pick our inheritance, or inherit our inheritance. That's a reference to the Beis Hamikdash. And he says, V'zei perish, and that's, so by the way, so until now was the words of Rebbe Nachman. And from now and on is going to be Rebbe Nussen explaining, so he'll elaborate on some of the themes that Rebbe Nachman talked about in this piece. So he says like this, V'zei perish, this is the parish of V'emer Hashem el Moshe, Koro es Yeshia, that Hashem said to Moshe, call Yeshia. Moshe, in the Kiddush Elyodah, Moshe is that higher yid of the Aleph. The Yeshia, called to Yeshia. In the Kiddush Tachtoina, that's the lower yid of the Aleph. And then it says Visyatzvi ba'oil, and they like gathered in the oil. Say bechinas rakia. That's the rakia, which is bechinas vuv shebetoicha aleph. So there you have it. Moshe is calling to Yeshia, and they're gathering in the oil. That's the whole aleph. The top yid of the aleph, the bottom yid of the aleph, and the vuv in between is the oil. And then it says Vatzaveni. It says Ki Moshe hoya tzurich az limsor hakol Yeshia. Moshe had to now give everything over to Yeshia because Moshe was going to die. Right? V'ain shaltin b'yoyim hamovus, and there's no rulership on the day of death. Koheles says, which push means that that even a king, even someone who has great importance on the day of his death, he's just a regular person because he's moving on. He's not going to take any of that with him. He has to leave his entire kingdom to whoever's inheriting it from him. Right? So that's the idea there. But if Nussen says here, kibishas histalkis atzadik einloy shlita v'koyach lehur liyashir. When the tzaddik is passing away, he doesn't have that energy anymore to give over to his talmud to the next level. Al kain dayach atzaveni. That's why you have to be a dayach atzaveni. That Hashem will be the one who will command Yeshia. Ani be'atzmi, Hashem Himself. Ki chazra hamamshula l'kodesh baruch hu, that ownership goes back to Hashem. So in the sense that even when the tzaddik passes away and moves on, then the way that that's given over to the next tzaddik after him is going to be mahamish through the Yad Hashem, and Hashem is going to be the one to give that over. It has v'klal kol ha'inyan kulul between us aleph. So all of this whole inyan has to do with this idea that we talked about the shape of the aleph. Shenikid eliyoyna, v'nikid tachtoyna, v'vuv, because the aleph has a yid on top, a yid on the bottom, and a vuv in the middle. V'doik ma'oid, and be medaik in this. V'hi inyan, shalom nechazal, this is what Chazal said, shekoidem knesses Yisrael, or before the Klal went to the Eretz Yisrael, Hizri l'kaim shulash mitzvahs, they were required to do 3 mitzvahs. And this is again what Nachman was talking about before, and this is now elaborating. Hachra zara shel Amalek, to destroy the children of Amalek. Live as a baisa bechir, to build a baisa mikdash. Live nois melech, and to establish a king. It says, L'hachra zara shel Amalek hi bechinas Yeshia. That this first aspect, which is the aspect of defeating the zara shel Amalek, Nachman already told us that's the idea of the lower yid of the aleph. But here he says it more beferish. Ki bechinas Yeshia. This is associated with Yeshia, Nikeda Tachtoi, which is that lower yid of the aleph. Kikar mechias Amalek tuli b'Yeshia, because the main wiping out of Amalek is dependent on Yeshia, as we see. Moshe like says in Shmos, Tzai Eluchaim be'Amalek, that Moshe says to Yeshia that he should go and make Milchama with Amalek. Yeshia was the general in that sense. So it's incumbent on Yeshia on that level of the Yidden, even before they've risen to that higher level, to wipe out that bechinas Amalek. Like the Zohar explains the Inyan. And he says, to build the Baisa Mikdash, he bechinas Moshe. That's the idea of Moshe, Niked Elyoina, the top yid of the Aleph. Kimishesh loy daya, ki ili nivna Baisa Mikdash. If someone that has das, said the Baisa Mikdash was built in his days. The Moshe bechinas das. We said this already, right? And to have a king, he bechinas rakia. That's like the rakia, the vuv that's in the middle between the 2 yids of the Aleph. Havuv shebetoicha Aleph. Mashkusav durach koichav miyakov, right? Which you said, Shekui al Shirika Melech Miyakov, that this is going on, a king being established from Yaakov. V'durach koichav he bechinas rakia, and this idea of a star will come from Yaakov. The star represents the rakia, represents the heavens. Shesh like a chov mazulas, which that's the heavens contain the stars and the mazulas and the constellations. It's behind him Yaakov, and that's what it means that it comes from Yaakov. Bechinas Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev Oholim, which is the idea of Yaakov being a simple person sitting in the tent, which the tent which covers over is bechinas rakia. That's the idea of the heavens. Koshakusiv v'yim techaim koil, that the Hashem stretched out the heavens like a tent. Like Zohar explains, Yaakov he bechinas vuv. Yaakov is that vuv. Ki gimel mitzvahs. Either these 3 mitzvahs, and bechinas tshiva, and those 3 mitzvahs are going to correspond to tshiva. So that's what he says here. And now he explains min v'klal Adkan Kufel in Shini Lushin Ktsas. Right. So this what we had here was just a slightly different version of what we already saw Nachman said in the piece Zion right before. But now it says Shaykh La'el. Now he's going to explain something that Nachman said before. Nachman threw in a few words, and he didn't explain them. He said before in the part of the piece that we saw last week, when he was talking about the union of Chiva and the Nova, he said Zay Soid Kavunas Elul. That's the side of the Kavuna of Elul, and he didn't go into it. So here I'm just going to explain to us what Nachman meant by that. There's Zay Soid Kavunas Elul, Shemati Ktsas Ketipa Min Hayam. I heard a little bit like a drop from the sea in the sense of what Rebbe Nachman meant by this. Ein Sham Bekavuna Sha'el. Look in the Kavunas of Elul, Mevoyer Sham, and it says over there, in the sense, this is in Shari HaKodesh in the Rizal. The Rizal brings a yichud for Elul, something that person should have in mind. This yichud, which a yichud is basically usually it takes a pusik of some sort. There's all different types of word plays and gematrias and shaimas that you see in that pusik. You need to visualize it and go through it like a sort of a meditation. And there's a special one for Elul that's brought down there in Shari HaKodesh. So he's going to explain how this relates to what we were talking about and why Rabbi Nachman mentioned kavunas of Elul. So he says, Sham, Sheklal kavunas Elul, the main kavanah of Elul is the pusik Hanoisen b'yam durech, that Hashem puts a path in the sea. Shetzrichem lehur b'chinas derech b'yam, that we have to make, so to speak, or light up a way in the sea. Zehad derech, and that derech, that way, he b'chinas bais pa'ovem Hashem yaboik. There's that Shem which is Yid bais kif, which is Gematria Havai and Elikim together. And that is a special Shem in and of itself. The river Yaboik that Yaakov crossed has to do with this Shem. But so you have this Shem, if you take twice that Shem, Kibayis Pum Yaboik, Oile Derech, 2 times that Shem is Gematria Derech. Okay? And this comes from 2 Shaimas, Shem Ksa and Sag. So Ksa, he's going to explain later on, but Ksa is just the name Ekya. If you spell out the oisius, so it'll be Aleph Lamed Pai, Kai Yid, Yid Vuv Dalet Kai Yid. That's Gematria 161, which is Ksa. Then Sag is one of the million of Shem Havaya, which is Yid Vuv Dalet Kai Yid, Vuv Aleph Vuv Kai Yid. So those 2 Shaimas, which are both associated with Binna, which is Chiva, which is part of the reason why the Rizal brings this Kavuna there. So those 2 Shaimas, Kelbait Shaimas, Ksa Sag, those 2 Shaimas, Ham Oine Be Gematria Baispom Yaboik. Those also add up to 2 times Yaboik in the Gematria. Shebechinas Derech, which is this Derech we're talking about. But Tzurich Lechaven Shem Ksa Besegel, Shem Sag Bechirik. So the way that you have to be mechavenet in this yichud that the Rizal brings is the entire Ksa you're going to have with segels. So it's going to be Aleph with a segel under it, Lamed with a segel under it, Pi with a segel under it, Pi with a segel under it, Yid with a segel under it. So it'll come out to, since there's 10 oasis in that milli, there's going to be 10 segels. And Sag is going to be with chiriks under it. So you're going to put 1 chirik under each of those 10 oasis of the milli Sag. So then, the segel the Ksav, the chirik the Sag, Hem olim tuf, they add up to 400. Because each dot in the Nikidus is a Yid. So a segel will be Gematria 30. Because a segel is like 3 dots. So 3 Yids, which is 30. Because Yid is Gematria 10. And a Chirik is just Gematria 10. Because a Chirik is just 1 dot. So if we have 10 oasis of Ksa, a segel under each, that's 30 dots. That's 300. 30 times 10. And then under the Sag, you'll have 10 Chiriks, so another 100. So 300 plus 100 is 400. And that's the Kavuna here. In the Gematria Pshita, did I skip? Yeah, I think I did skip. Yeah, okay, so back, you have Hem Olim Tov, so they add up to 400. Kishem Ksa, because his first Shem of Ksa, he's Shem Ekyer, B'mili Kazay, that's Ekyer spelled out like this, Aleph Lamed Pai. Kaid, Yid Vuv Daled Kaid, Shem Yid Oisis, which is 10 Oisis. We call Achas Nikidas Besegel. Each one of those has a Nikidas Segel. The Segel he Gimel Nikidas, and Segel is 3 dots. Al Kain Hi Oile Shloshim. So Segel, each Segel adds up to 30. Al Kain Yid Poem Segel. So if you take 10 times 30, or the sheet, it adds up to 300. The sag hem yid oises shel mili havaya. And the sag is at 10 oises of the mili of havaya. Yid vuv dalid, kayid, vuv alav, vuv kayid. We call achas nikida bechirik, and each of those has a chirik. Or the kif, so that adds up to 10 times 10 is 100. Vishnayim chirik desag v'segel diksa, or the yachad tov, it adds up to 400. Gematria pshita, which is gematria pshita. Why? Because that's the yad pshita lekabel poshem. He's going to say that's because in El we do tshiva, and that's Hashem's hand, which is open to receive all of us in tshiva. Va'az al yidai kol bechinas hanal. Through all these bechinas, haymin pshita lekabel tshiva, said Hashem's right hand is open to receive our tshiva. Ki yamin, because the word yamin b'meliyah, if you spell out the word yamin with the oisius, so yamin would be yid vuv daled mem mem, yid vuv daled nin vuv nin, is gemated 226. That's oile derech. Derech is 224. Ima gimel oisius with the three oisius. Doesn't add up exactly because it really, if you're counting three oisius, it should be really 227. But anyway, but close enough. She baispel miyaboik, which is 2 times yaboik, ein sham. And that's what he meant by kamunas elu. Okay. I sort of wanted to finish it, but there won't be time because I have to they're making minyan outside now. So I think we'll wrap it up here, and we'll just finish off this little last piece as Hashem next week. So yes, I have to run now. But if I saw some people logged in later, like I sent out an email that the shiurim are now at 9 because I have to go get to a minyan at 10. So the shiurim are now 9 to 10 for everyone to know. You can still log in whenever you want, like I don't mind, but just for everyone to know that it's starting earlier. So tomorrow 9 o'clock will be the shiur in Sifsei Chaim Bez Hashem. We're starting a new section there in Sifsei Chaim. Okay, everyone. Good night. Bez Hashem, we'll see all of you soon. Bez Hashem. Kol Tov.